Senator, for her friendship, for her leadership, and for her many years of service. Thank you.
Madam President.
The senator from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you so much. Madam President, I, too, am honored to be able to rise today and speak of our dear friend Barbara Mikulski. So many good things have been said, so many accolades have been shared, what Barbara has done and what she means to all of us. I can only tell you there's not a better ally, a mentor, a neighbor, most importantly a friend that I have in the Senate than Barbara Mikulski. We do share a border. Maryland and West Virginia have had a long and illustrious relationship. As governor, I had always known of Barbara and met her a few times when I served the great state of West Virginia. But as senator, I've had the privilege of being her colleague and working with her and becoming friends. Listening to her and watching her, how she works with her constituents, how she considers the issue, how she fights for the issue. And I don't think anyone's ever had to guess where Barbara stands on an issue because we've all known. In the 15 months that we have worked together, I can say that it's extremely rewarding to serve alongside of her. And whether it's her wisdom she shares on the train as we ride over to our sessions here, or whether we talk about basically both being raised in a grocery store. My grandfather had a little grocery store. As you know, Barbara was raised with her father in a grocery store. And I think that basically if you've got retail in your blood, you understand the people of America. Her sense of humor is something to behold. And every day that I have the privilege to serve with her is a good day in the Senate. I know that the colleagues have all shared their stories with her. They've had more experience with her in the Senate. I'm, as a freshman, being here a little over a year and a half, has not had that many personal experiences, except that I can tell you this. If there's a fight that breaks out, if there's something going wrong, you want Barbara on your side. She's the person that you want in that foxhole when the shooting starts. And I've been so appreciative to have her as my friend and always counting on her. She has been, as you heard, an advocate for women's health, the space program, her most beloved state of Maryland, she fights for every day. Last year, she became the first woman to reach the milestone of serving a quarter of a century in the Senate. And I have staffers who are younger than her service. But also I have young staffers, especially my female staffers, who said they see a world of possibility because of the trail that Senator Barbara Mikulski has left for them. So with all of that, she's made the trail for all of us. As Barbara Mikulski is a person that no one's going to be able to fill her shoes. We will all be lucky enough if we can just follow in her footsteps. When she began serving on the Hill in 1977, there were 20 other women in all of Congress. She and 17 others served in the House, while there were 3 in the Senate. Today, 35 years later, there are 17 women serving in the Senate. If there is anything that we can learn from Senator Barbara Mikulski, it's that 17 women is far too few. We need more women like you, Barbara, and just as importantly, we need more senators like you. I can honestly say that I know the state of Maryland is much better off because of Barbara Mikulski, but I can tell you that the United States of America is a better country because of Barbara Mikulski. So thank you to my dear friend Barbara for her service to this great country and to all the constituents of Maryland who must be extremely proud of her and have a right to be so. But I'm so proud to call her my friend and my neighbor. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Thank you.
President.
Yes, the senator from New Jersey is recognized.
I thank you, Madam President. We've listened with interest and total accord as the life in the Senate has been reviewed by so many people of friendship and goodwill about Barbara Mikulski. Her record is quite well known. She's determined to get things done. She never lets minutiae stand in the way or block an accomplishment. When I noticed one thing when Barbara Mikulski starts to talk in a debate, that the noise around the crowd, around the room, quiets down. And if you don't, beware. Barbara will call your attention to it and say it in a way that demands attention. Barbara and I arrived in the Senate at fairly close proximity. I came here in 1983, and Barbara arrived in 1986, as I recall. We were both on the Appropriations Committee. I had some slight seniority ahead of her, and one of the things that was being dealt with was seniority. And Barbara asked my help in the choice of a subcommittee, and I tried to step out of the way and help Barbara obtain the chairmanship of a subcommittee in appropriations, which she managed so well, so effectively. She once called me her Galahad, and I was proud of the moniker because it was intended to be a compliment and a friend and a sign of friendship. Strikingly, Barbara Mikulski and I had backgrounds that were not dissimilar. I came from Polish heritage. My father, my grandparents on my paternal side were born in Poland, as Barbara's family did. They were immigrants. That my parents were brought as children from Europe and went through the traditional immigrant absorption. My folks found it very hard to make a living as they grew up here, grew up in America. My grandparents were essentially poor people with a kind of blue-collar background and had to resort to storekeeping to keep food on the table, a roof overhead, clothes on their back. And the one thing that threaded through those years for me, and I heard it coming from Barbara Mikulski and so many times when she spoke, and that was there was always dignity in the house, that there was always a positive outlook. And as I heard it, her parents, or my parents like hers, were not able to do much with presents and valuables, but they did something else. And you see it so fundamentally clear in Barbara Mikulski's demeanor and her behavior, that what she learned at home, the same thing I learned at home, and that was the meaning of values, not valuables, values. And values included a character obligation for hard work and honesty and decency. They were the yardsticks by which we were measured as children and as adults. So I worked very closely with Barbara. I left the Senate, as is known, for 2 years, and my seniority slipped as a consequence. Barbara seniority continued to grow, and she was chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee. But Barbara always brought a degree of strength and energy to the things that she said, to the things that she did. And though Barbara, during a presentation, wanted to make sure that she was heard and heard correctly, she would also pop up with humor. She had a facility with words, had a facility with expression that would have you engrossed in what she was saying and caught off guard when a joke would, or a humorous statement would pop up. So when we note that Barbara Mikulski, from this modest background, was always on the side of working people, and it was never just a mask, it was the truth, it was where she wanted to be. And I must say that she, for me, was always a steadfast beacon that would remind us, don't get carried away too much with your personal importance. Get carried away with the things that you had to do as your responsibility as a senator. And when Barbara Mikulski, who came these years ago, it was noted that she was the first among the women to come to the Senate, and ultimately, as we now know, became the longest serving, and carried herself through all of the difficulties that we've had, but always, always, you could depend on Barbara Mikulski. When Barbara stood up, people stopped talking about things that were extraneous, and they would listen carefully because Barbara Mikulski always made so much sense, and she didn't let you get by without a challenge if she believed that you were wrong. And so we've heard about her record, we've heard about her accomplishments, and everybody had wonderful things to say about her. I listened carefully to the statements that were being made, and thought about our days together, and how wonderful it was to be able to hear Barbara Mikulski make sense out of what often escaped challenge. And she would offer the challenge, and she would offer solutions. So I, like our other colleagues, stand here in awe and respect and note that Barbara Mikulski, the storekeeper's daughter, is so much like that which I saw in my own life, and we've seen in America and in that past century. And Barbara Mikulski, who in all due modesty, without any impression of a smug satisfaction, always ready to take up the battle for the people whom she served, not only in the state of Maryland, but across the country. She was an inspiration for women coming to government, and she served so well as a demonstration of what could be. And so, Madam President, I'm delighted to be here, to stand here as a friend and an admirer of Barbara Mikulski and wish her many more years of service, and know that if Barbara is here, if Barbara's around, you can always count on sense and good judgment to result. And with that, I yield the floor.
The senator from New York is recognized.
I associate myself with the colleagues of the senator from New Jersey. It's with great admiration that I rise today to join all of my colleagues who have spoken before me and who will continue to speak on her, honoring the senator from Maryland, Barbara Mikulski, as the longest-serving woman in the history of the United States Congress. It has been such an honor to serve with Senator Mikulski in my just 3 years here in the Senate. She has quickly become a dear friend and an invaluable mentor, just as she has been for all of the other female colleagues as the Dean of the Women Senators. It wasn't until 1932 that Hattie Caraway became the first woman ever elected to the United States Senate, and it wasn't until a half a century later, in 1986, that against all odds, Barbara Mikulski became the first Democratic woman ever elected to the Senate. That's right, when she arrived in the Senate, she was just one of 2 women serving in this body. Now, the longest-serving woman in the congressional history, Senator Mikulski is showing just what's possible when you ignore conventional wisdom, never stop fighting for what's right, and honor our commitment to families that elect us every single day. One of her hallmark battles has been the fight for equal pay for work for women. This is not only an issue of equality and justice, but an economic imperative, because as we stand here today with more dual-income households than ever, women only make 78 cents on the dollar compared to men. For women of color, the disparity is even greater. African-American women earning 62 cents on the dollar and Latinas 53 cents on the dollar. I know Senator Mikulski won't give up until we correct this outrageous injustice, and I'm honored to be fighting alongside of her. Senator Mikulski has also led the fight to strengthen our laws against domestic violence and open up access to health screenings and treatment that save women's lives. And close to my heart, she was among the first to stand up to insurance companies that said that being a woman was a pre-existing condition. You can always count on Senator Mikulski to lead the charge in drawing a line in the sand in the Senate when it comes to protecting women's health and women's right to choose. We just saw it yet again when she stood up to the dangerous overreach of the Blunt Amendment that would have denied women of this country the ability to choose which medications to take and leave that decision to their boss. She embodies the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. The battle for individual rights of women is one of long standing, and none of us should countenance anything that undermines it. It's that spirit, making your voice heard, never backing down in the face of injustice, that has made Senator Mikulski one of the strongest voices we have for women in this country and women around the world. Every single day, she is paving the way for more women leaders in America by showing the young women and girls of this country that women's voices matter and are needed in our public debate. I want to close by expressing my personal debt of gratitude to her for her vision, her leadership, and her pioneering spirit. I simply could not imagine working in this body without her leadership. She's taught me so much in such a short period of time, and just as importantly, she's fostered an unbreakable bipartisan spirit among our colleagues that has resulted in important victories for the American public. Thank you, Senator Mikulski, and congratulations on your historic achievement. It is an honor to serve with you, and I hope to continue to serve with you for many years to come. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from New Mexico is recognized.
Both Senator Sessions and Senator Snowe are here, and I don't know if they wanted to speak. I know we've had a flow of speakers on this side, and if one of you wants to speak before I speak, I think it's the fair thing to do. Senator Sessions, you.
Madam President?
Yes, the senator from Alabama is recognized.
My understanding was that that Senator Durbin was going to make a UC request, which I would plan to object to, and there might be some brief discussion of that, but I don't see Senator Durbin on the floor.
I was just, Senator Sessions, I'm just going to probably be the concluding remarks on celebrating Senator Mikulski's, so I'm going to proceed with that. If that's, Madam President, you know, we've been here now for almost 3 hours. I was down here when we started this. Senator Feinstein started about 2 o'clock, and we're approaching 5 o'clock now for an incredible celebration of Barbara Mikulski's career. And I've listened to a lot of it, both at my office and here on the floor, and it's pretty remarkable to hear the kinds of things she's done with her life. And I rise today to honor my colleague, Senator Barbara Mikulski. As been noted, this month, Senator Mikulski becomes the longest-serving woman in the history of Congress. With her perfect sense of timing, Barbara reaches this historic milestone during Women's History Month. And it is for the history books. But as Barbara has said, it's not how long I serve, but how well I serve. And she has served very well. She served her beloved state of Maryland very well, and she served this country in a number of capacities on the Appropriations Committee and on various committees in the Congress. And we celebrate this historic occasion. But more deeply, we celebrate Barbara's record of achievement, a record that transcends gender, a record that is rooted in a life dedicated to public service. Since she was first elected to public office in 1971 to the Baltimore City Council, Barbara has been setting milestones. Just think about that for a minute. 1971. This is 40 years plus of public service. As the chair knows, this is pretty remarkable. She served in public service for a while. I've served for a while, but 41 years of public service. It's remarkable. The first woman elected to statewide office in Maryland, the first Democratic woman elected to the Senate in her own right, the first woman in the Senate Democratic leadership, and the first Democratic woman to serve in both houses of Congress. And yet, it is not her being first that is the most impressive. It is her commitment to putting others first. And Barbara has shown that commitment time and again. In over 35 years in the Congress, she has never wavered in her service to our nation, in her dedication to the people of Maryland. She has fought for quality education. She has fought for American seniors. She has fought for women's health and for veterans. For women facing unequal pay, Barbara championed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. For senior citizens facing bankruptcy because of a spouse's nursing home care, Barbara wrote the Spousal Anti-Impoverishment Act. Yes, she is a trailblazer, but she blazes those trails to help others. For young people who dream of going to college, for families facing devastating illness, for opportunity for all Americans, that has been her passion. That has been her true achievement, and that will be her greatest legacy. When Barbara was first elected to the Senate in 1986, there was only one other female senator. Now there are 17. Barbara is rightly so the dean of the women. She is a mentor to her female colleagues, but no less so, she is an inspiration to all of us. One thing I admire about Barbara is her remarkable determination, her tenacity, but also her ability to work with others to get things done. She will fight for what she believes in, but she will sit down to dinner with her colleagues across the aisle. And she has never forgotten where she came from. The daughter of a Baltimore grocer, each night she returns home to Baltimore. She has never forgotten the values she learned there: hard work, helping one's neighbor, patriotism. She's diminutive in height only. That was evident early on. The story is well known, how as a young community activist, Barbara stopped that 16-lane highway from coming through Baltimore's Fells Point neighborhood. She's not afraid to stand up to power, and she's not afraid of speaking strongly to power. In all the ways that really count, Senator Barbara Mikulski is a towering figure. Albert Schweitzer once said, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know for sure. The only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." This Barbara Mikulski has done. From her early days as a social worker to her years in Congress, she has served. She has served long and well. So congratulations, Barbara. It's an honor to be your colleague. And, Mr. President, I would just ask that my statement be inserted in the record as if read. Thank you.
Without objection.
And I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I couldn't be more pleased as well as privileged to join all of my colleagues here today in congratulating a very good friend and esteemed colleague, the Dean of the Women of the United States Senate, Senator Barbara Mikulski, on overtaking Congresswoman Edith North Rogers as the longest-serving woman in the history of the United States Congress. As someone who has had the privilege of knowing Senator Mikulski since 1978, when I was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, for me this milestone represents a watershed moment in the life of American politics. For nearly 35 years, I have witnessed Barbara Mikulski summon and harness a seemingly limitless reservoir of energy as a fierce advocate and a champion on behalf of the people of Maryland as well as the country. With equal parts vigor and vigilance, she has demonstrated a devotion to her constituents that has been unerring in its promise and ironclad in its purpose. And it's precisely that caliber of service that the people of Maryland have rewarded time and time again. As I stated on this very floor at the outset of this Congress, when she surpassed the length of service of Maine's legendary Senator Margaret Chase Smith, Senator Mikulski is synonymous with a special bond of trust that should exist between the governing and the governed. She has recognized injustice and acted boldly to quell it, giving a voice to the voiceless, power to the powerless. And what Senator Margaret Chase Smith and Congresswoman Edith North Rogers exemplified as standard bearers in the last century for length of service, Senator Mikulski embodies in this century. That the commitment to advancing the common good is bound neither by geographic region nor political affiliation, but rather by an undaunted desire to serve others. A consummate role model and admired mentor, Senator Mikulski always stands as a shining example that the robust pursuit of policy and the willingness to hear and consider dissenting views are not mutually exclusive. As I've often said, Senator Mikulski knows only one speed, and that is full speed ahead. But by the same token, she only knows one way to govern, through what she aptly refers to as the zone of civility. That approach, so integral to making this institution work, is indisputably one of the hallmark measures of Senator Mikulski's long-standing success in public life. And indeed, it's the blueprint for interaction that she has imbued in all of us who are women serving in the United States Senate. She has worked to establish a tone of respect that infuses our conversations, our collegiality, our collaborations. It is a personal cause for Senator Mikulski that is exemplified by the monthly dinners for women senators that she initiated, along with the senator from Texas, Senator Hutchison, a tradition that has become a catalyst for camaraderie and central to what Senator Mikulski calls our unbreakable bond. So there's been no greater friend for women who have come to serve the United States Senate, and I'm sure it's a result of Senator Mikulski having arrived here as the second woman to serve the United States Senate, along with the senator from Kansas, Senator Kassenbaum. As she said at the time, and that's why she was so willing to serve as a mentor for other women who arrived in the United States Senate, because she was only one of two women who were serving in this institution. And as she said, the Senate had a long tradition for every man for himself. Well, she was determined, she said, that it would not be every woman for herself while she was in the United States Senate. And as my colleagues who also well know, when it comes to having an ally in the legislative foxhole, there's none more feisty, none more formidable, and certainly none better than Senator Barbara Mikulski. I have witnessed her tenacity firsthand, having worked with her side by side over the decades, whether on matters of equity for women in the workplace, ensuring gender-integrated training in our military, or working on cybersecurity, or working on every other issue where we're bringing justice to those who have borne the brunt of injustice. And nowhere has her leadership been more unmistakable, of course, more monumental than in the area of women's health. And I well recall, Mr. President, when I arrived in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1979, I joined what was then known as the Congresswomen's Caucus on Women's Issues, where I ultimately became the co-chair for a better part of a decade. And Senator Barbara Mikulski at that time, being in the House of Representatives, served in that caucus as well. When I arrived in the House of Representatives in 1979, there were only 16 women serving in that institution. And that's why the Congresswomen's Caucus was formed, to focus on those issues that mattered to women and to family and to children. We recognized that it was our obligation and responsibility to focus on those issues, because otherwise they would languish on the back burner rather than being on the front burner. We also understood that if we didn't focus on these issues, if we didn't advance these issues, that no one else would. And so we began to tackle systematically many of the discriminatory laws or inequities that were embedded in federal law that failed to recognize the dual role that women were playing both at home as well as in the workplace. And we began to work on these issues one by one because there were so many issues across the board that were affecting women where they were ultimately bearing the burden and the consequences of these inequitable laws. We did that with respect to pensions, for example, where women would discover that after their husbands died that their pensions had been canceled. We discovered it when it came to family and medical leave. It took us a better part of 7 years to enact that legislation. But again, women were bearing the burden of taking care of their ailing parents or their children at home and paying the consequences in the workplace. And then, of course, was the issue when we discovered there was discriminatory treatment in our clinical study trials. And regrettably, that at the time, our National Institutes of Health was actually discriminating against women and minorities, excluding them from clinical study trials because it was too complicated to include women in these study trials because we were biologically different. And so as a result, any of those treatments that were developed as a result of those trials could not be applied to women. So ultimately, this could make the difference between life and death because of the kinds of procedures and treatments that were derived from these clinical study trials could not be applied to women. Well, when we discovered that these inequities exist and this discriminatory treatment, we set to work on how to redress this wrong. It was hard to believe that there was a time in America where women and minorities were systematically excluded from these trials that, as I said, had life-saving implications. And who would have thought that women's health would have been the missing page in America's medical textbook or merely an afterthought? So I, as a co-chair, along with Congresswoman Pat Schroeder in the House, on behalf of the caucus, and of course then Senator Barbara Mikulski in the Senate, teamed up in a close bipartisan, bicameral collaboration to establish the groundbreaking Office of Women's Health at the National Institutes of Health, so that never again would women be overlooked when it came to key clinical study trials that were underwritten by the federal taxpayers and federal funds. In fact, Senator Mikulski, as I well recall, launched a key panel of stakeholders at Bethesda to give this initiative critical national attention and momentum, as only she could, as well as fundamental policy changes that ultimately resulted from that panel that reverberate to this day, resulting as well in life-saving medical discoveries for America's women. Well, that's the passion and power of Senator Mikulski that has led her to this historic day. Barbara isn't about legacy, she's about problem solving. As somebody described, her ideology is grounded in the practical, and that's so true. It's not only the practical, but giving power to the people and developing practical solutions in their everyday lives. She is a guardian of the common good, a woman who redefines the word trailblazer, a pioneer of public policy. Senator Mikulski continues to shape the landscape of our nation for the better with a force and a might and a stature befitting one of the giants of public service, not just in our time, but for all time. So on the occasion of Senator Mikulski's record-breaking service, we congratulate her, we salute her, we are honored to be able to express a profound appreciation for extraordinary and legendary tenure in the United States Senate. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I ask that my entire statement be put on the record. I know my two colleagues are here, and so I will be brief.
Without objection, the entire statement will be put in the record.
Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon to celebrate Barbara Mikulski's service to this country. I had the honor of presiding for the last hour, heard the statements of so many of my colleagues, heard them talk about how when she joined this chamber in 1986, Barbara Mikulski was the first woman elected to the Senate who was not preceded by a husband or a father, the first woman selected to the statewide office to serve the state of Maryland, and only the 16th woman to have served in the United States Senate ever. Today, she is truly the dean of the women senators. She is a mentor and a friend to the rest of us, and she has always set the bar high. This is a woman who took on City Hall as a young social worker in Baltimore and won. This is a woman who has championed landmark legislation that has touched the lives of millions on issues ranging from health care to education to civil rights. She has shattered glass ceilings, not just in the Senate, but in the Congress as a whole. And as if that isn't enough, Mr. President, she has even graced the glossy pages of Vogue magazine. Most of you may have not seen the photos which were taken in front of the Capitol building with another number of other women leaders, including Meryl Streep, who was in town for a screening of her film, The Iron Lady. So I think it is fitting to borrow a phrase from the Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher, who famously said, "In politics, if you want anything said, ask a man. If you want anything done, ask a woman." I don't think my male colleagues who are here today will take offense to that one, since anyone who has ever worked with Barbara Mikulski knows that she is a force of nature. She may not be the tallest member of the United States Senate, but she is certainly the most tenacious. She is a tireless advocate for the people of her state, and she has a fierce and enduring love for those that she represents. She knows where to pick her battles, and we've seen her face some tough debates in the Senate over the past few years, whether it was working to take C-sections off the list of pre-existing conditions at insurance companies, or fighting to ensure equal pay for equal work for women, or promoting better educational opportunities for children with special needs, or ensuring our troops and families receive the benefits that they've earned and that they deserve. She has never stopped working for fairness, justice, and decency. The daughter of a small-town grocery store owner, she has made strengthening the middle class the centerpiece of her economic agenda. Because as she always puts it, the women in the Senate understand issues not just at the macro level, but also at the macaroni and cheese level. When Barbara Mikulski came to the Senate 26 years ago, she lit a torch that has brightened the path for so many of us, for the 16 other women senators who serve today, and for all the future generations of women leaders who will lead our country forward. I am humbled to call her a colleague and a friend, and I am honored to celebrate her incredible service to our country today. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Illinois. President. Senator from Illinois. You have to leave.
I'll be there.
Colleagues here who are continuing the tributes to Senator Mikulski, and I want to, if I could possibly help the things out, I have a statement that was scheduled at 5 o'clock that would take all of about 10 minutes, and then I would like to yield the floor at that point. I don't know if the members who are on the floor want to establish a queue of who will follow, but if anyone wants to make that unanimous consent request, I see that Senator Carper and Senator Cantwell are here on this side, Senator Coates on the other side. I don't know if Senator Sessions is planning to speak after I've spoken on a substantive matter beyond the UC request.
No, although I wouldn't mind seizing the opportunity to speak about Senator Mikulski, but just for a minute. But otherwise, if the senators has no
well, may I suggest this?
Speechification, I won't respond.
I am going to give a statement and make a UC request, which I had planned at 5 o'clock, and I've waited. And if I could suggest that I be followed by Senator Sessions, then Senator Carper, Senator Coates.
Well, if the senator would yield on that, I don't want to interrupt the tribute to Senator Mikulski, and I know you have some business that you've arranged. I'll work to find another time, so you don't have to include me in the queue. I'm talking on a different subject, and I don't want to be the skunk at the party here. I think the tribute is worthwhile, and I'll find another time to do this.
And I would like to make an admission that I've already spoken about Senator Mikulski earlier, and this is a different issue. But I know that, all right, then I suggest after Senator Sessions it would be Senator Carper, then Senator Cantwell. Correct?
That would be great.
I ask unanimous consent that the senators be recognized in the order that I've just noted.
Without objection, would the senator like to request that the non-tribute related portion of his discussion be put at a separate place in the record so that the tribute proceeds unimpeded?
Just what I was about to ask the chair to have permission that my statement, not related to Senator Mikulski, be placed at a separate place in the record.
Without objection, it will be so.
I thank the chair. Mr. President, by this time next week, the Supreme Court will have finished hearing oral arguments in the case challenging the constitutionality of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. How important is this Supreme Court case on health care reform? Well, health care is such an important issue that Congress spent 1 year drafting and debating a bill that the Court's going to consider next week. Health care has been a critical issue for so long in our country that in the last century, 9 different presidents have spent time, energy, and political capital fighting for reform. It's so important the Supreme Court reserved 6 hours for oral argument over the course of 3 days to consider the Act's constitutionality. The last time the Court dedicated that kind of time to any one case was in 1966. If I'm not mistaken, that's 46 years ago when it considered Miranda versus Arizona. Nevertheless, not even the health care case is important enough for the Supreme Court to justify breaking its antiquated tradition and allowing cameras to televise the proceedings. So the American people are not going to have a chance to see and hear these historic arguments for themselves as they take place. I can't predict the outcome of the case, but I can tell you what to expect just outside the doors of the Supreme Court. It's a scene that we've seen over and over again for decades. Thousands will gather outside the court. Many are going to camp overnight, sleeping on the sidewalks in the hopes of getting one of about 200 seats available to the public. The vast majority of those wanting to see the Supreme Court argument on one of the most important cases of our time will be told, no, you're not allowed to come inside the court. We don't have room for you. In a democratic society that values transparency and participation, there can't be any valid justification for such a powerful element of government to operate outside the view of the American people. For too long, the American people have been prevented from observing open sections of the Supreme Court. Except for the privileged few, the VIPs, members of the Supreme Court bar, or the press, the most powerful court in our land, some might argue in the world, is inaccessible to the public and shrouded in mystery. I'm pleased to stand in the committee, Judiciary Committee, with Senator Grassley, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, asking that the Senate pass our bipartisan bill that would require televising open Supreme Court proceedings. With the benefit of modern technology, the Supreme Court proceedings can be televised using unobtrusive cameras and the court's existing audio recording capability. Our bill respects the constitutional rights of the parties before the court, and it respects the discretion of the justices. The court can decline to televise any proceeding where the justices determine by a majority vote that doing so would violate due process of one or more parties. In our view, Senator Grassley and myself, this is a reasonable approach that balances the public need for information and transparency, the constitutional rights of those before the court, and the discretion of the judges. It's no secret that Senator Grassley and I have strong disagreements about the actual law that's going to be considered by the court. We've taken to the floor many times to explain our positions. Despite our disagreement on substance, Senator Grassley and I agree on a bipartisan basis to stand united in support of S. 1945 to finally bring transparency and openness to our Supreme Court. We're not the only members of this body who believe that these proceedings would produce greater accountability. In past years, the Cameras in the Courtroom Act enjoyed bipartisan support. The last sponsor of the act before he left the Senate was Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania. This version of the bill, very similar to his own, has the support of Senators Cornyn, Klobuchar, Schumer, Blumenthal, Gillibrand, Harkin, and Begich. As Senator Grassley would note, Democrats and Republicans from both chambers have written to the Supreme Court asking it to permit live television broadcasts of the health care reform arguments next week. In November, Senators Blumenthal, Schumer, and I wrote the letter to the Chief Justice making the request, open the Supreme Court for this historic argument. Let America hear the argument made before the court and the questions asked by the justices in open court. Well, Chief Justice Roberts responded to our request last week, and it sounds like he sent the same letter, incidentally, to Senator Grassley. The Chief Justice informed us that the Supreme Court has respectfully declined to televise the health care arguments, but that the court would graciously offer an alternative. Here's the alternative. Now the court will post audio recordings and unofficial transcripts to the court's website just a few hours after the arguments are over. For that gesture, I guess we can congratulate the United States Supreme Court for entering the radio age. America entered the radio age 90 years ago. The Supreme Court is catching up with a delayed broadcast, audio only. But I think America deserves better. Decisions that affect our nation should be accessible by the people who are affected by those decisions, and they should be produced in a way that Americans can both see and hear. The day of the fireside chat is gone. The day of radio transmissions exclusively, those days are gone. Television and even the Internet are the dominant media for communicating messages and ideas in the modern America. It's not too much to ask the third branch of government at the highest level to share the arguments before the court with the people of America. Understand, there'll be hundreds of people present and watching this as it occurs. It isn't confidential or private. It's only kept away from the rest of America because this court doesn't want America to see the proceedings. The Supreme Court's an elite institution in our government. Every member of the Supreme Court went to one of two Ivy League law schools. Most of the clerks before the court come from one of 7 law schools. None of the current justices have ever run for public office. None of the current justices have ever tried a death penalty case. And the lawyers that appear before the Supreme Court are part of a small and exclusive club. Perhaps this limited exposure is why many on the court don't seem to fully appreciate the impact its decisions have on everyday America, and why the American people deserve to have more access to the court's public proceedings. Since the Supreme Court is the final word on constitutionality, on issues that impact every American, the American people should have full and free access to its open proceedings on television. Now, let's be clear about one thing. Our bill only applies to court sessions already open to the public. Supreme Court justices should be able to consult with each other, review cases, and deliberate privately. No one in this bill or otherwise is calling for those private deliberations to be televised. I believe that televising private deliberations or closed sessions of the court could cause harm to our judicial system. Our bill doesn't require it. I wouldn't support it. Open sessions, already open sessions of the court, however, where members of the public are already invited to observe, are a different matter. They should be televised in real time and widely available. Some who oppose our bill say that the elite cadre of seasoned lawyers with the rare opportunity to argue before the highest court in the land will grandstand in front of the cameras, risking their professional reputations and even their clients' cases. Some say the court's justices, who've been subjected to the most rigorous vetting process known to man and widely covered confirmation hearings, will suddenly shrink from asking tough questions because of the camera's glaring lens. I don't buy it. The experience of state and federal courts that have allowed their open proceedings to be televised proves these fears unfounded. While the federal courts of appeal have not yet permitted live cameras to broadcast all appellate proceedings, there was a 3-year pilot project in 1990 that assessed the impact of cameras in the federal courts. Listen to what happened as a result of that pilot program. At the end of the day, 19 of the 20 judges most involved concluded that the presence of cameras in the federal courts, quote, had no effect on the administration of justice, end of quote. Don't take my word for it. Kenneth Starr, former Solicitor General and independent counsel, supports our bill and said this: "This fear seems groundless. The idea that cameras would transform the Supreme Court into Judge Judy is ludicrous." For more than 30 years, state courts have broadcast their proceedings, and in fact what they found is it hasn't detracted at all from the pursuit of justice. Every state in our nation permits all or part of their appellate court proceedings to be recorded for broadcast on television or streaming on the Internet. Expanding access to the Supreme Court by televising its proceedings shouldn't be controversial. Public scrutiny of the Supreme Court proceedings produce greater accountability, transparency, understanding, and access to the decision-making in government. Congressional debates have been fully televised for more than 3 decades. There are people who follow C-SPAN broadcasts religiously. I know. I meet them regularly. As I've said in the Judiciary Committee, people will come up to me and say, "One of your colleagues looks a little bit under the weather. Has he got the flu? Is he sick?" They just, by observing C-SPAN, are following the floor of the Senate and know each of us, they think, on a more personal basis. They hear these statements. They listen to our debate. They feel better informed about their government. Wouldn't the same apply across the street in the Supreme Court? Opponents of our bill say the public will be misinformed because all they'll see are brief clips of the court's proceeding that can be misconstrued, leaving the public with the wrong impression. As I've said previously, this argument sounds a lot like an editorial from a few years ago, and here's what it said: "Keeping cameras out of the Supreme Court to prevent people from getting the wrong idea is a little like removing the paintings from an art museum out of fear that visitors might not have the art history background to appreciate them." In 1986, Chief Justice Burger wrote the following words in the Supreme Court's Press Enterprise Company versus Superior Court opinion. These words are true today as they were in 1986. "People in an open society do not demand infallibility from their institutions, but it's difficult for them to accept what they are prohibited from observing. The time has long since come for the Supreme Court, for the highest court in our land, to open its doors and allow the American people to finally observe its proceedings. Mr. President, at this point, I would like to make a unanimous consent request relative to this bill that would open the Supreme Court proceedings to be televised. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 319, S. 1945, a bill to permit the televising of Supreme Court proceedings, that the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President. I want to congratulate my colleague, Senator Durbin, for his able articulation of his view. This is a matter that the Senate and the Congress has considered for quite a number of years. It has not decided to take this step to direct a co-equal branch of government how to conduct their business, and I don't think we should. So I think it would be inappropriate to pass this on a UC without a full debate and discussion and a full vote on it. So I would say that. Also, I would note that the justices have opposed this policy. I think we have a duty to respect the co-equal branch of our government. They feel like it would impact adversely the tenor and tone of the oral arguments. The justices would have to feel burdened to explain why they're asking a question, to perhaps instead of just citing a case by name that all the lawyers would know, but to explain to non-lawyers now what was on their mind as a part of their process of questioning. And so I think that's a factor. I would also note that it raises constitutional questions. Why do we want to push to the limit and perhaps over the limit and try to dictate to a co-equal branch how to conduct the adjudicative process, not the political process? We're the political branch. That's the non-political branch where judges are given lifetime tenures, so to insulate them from pressure and to allow them to dispassionately decide complex issues. And I would just note also that in terms of what is said and how an argument goes, there's no difference, I suppose, in that than what goes on in chambers when the judges meet in private and talk about what issues are before the court and how it should be decided. What is important in the adjudicative branch? What is the criterion, the fundamental essence of a judicial proceeding? Ultimately, it's the judgment. The judgment speaks. The arguments don't speak. The in-camera discussions don't speak. The judgment itself represents the opinion of the court. It is the law and the binding process. So although I appreciate very much my esteemed colleague, I know he loves the law, as we both do. He believes this would improve justice in America. I can't conclude that that is correct. I believe that justices should be given the responsibility to conduct their branch consistent with their best judgment of how to do it. Therefore, I object. And I thank and respect my colleague for his different opinion.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alabama.
I wanted to ask consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar 247S671, that the committee reported amendment to 671 be agreed to, the bill be amended as read a third time and passed.
Mr. President?
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. It's my understanding that Judiciary Committee staff has been working on a package of important Judiciary Committee bills, including the very bill that Senator Sessions has asked consent to move to, a bill which I quite likely will support. Would the Senator be willing to modify his request to include the passage of other bills which are part of that package and have similarly important elements to them in terms of keeping America safe. They include the following: Calendar number 246, S-1792, Strengthening Investigations of Sex Offenders and Missing Children Act; Calendar number 233, S-1793, the Investigative Assistance for Violent Crimes Act; and discharging the Judiciary Committee from further consideration of S-1696, the Dale Long Public Safety Officers Benefits Improvements Act, agreeing to a substitute amendment which is at the desk and passing the bill as amended.
Does the Senator so modify his request?
Mr. President, I appreciate the suggestion by the Senator from Illinois, as I believe I would be able to support all of those